Okay, this is the video I've been looking forward to the most in this Major League Commissioners series. It's the NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. So let's have a quick look at NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. Now, this is the second video I've done on Gary Bettman. The previous one was back in 2018, and a lot has happened in the last 7 years from the previous time I did a video on NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman till now. He's broken a commissioner record. He's now the longest tenured North American Major League Commissioner in history, passing his former boss, David Stern, who was commissioner at the NBA for 30 years. He's been enrolled for over 32 years now, so he's now set his own record in that regard. And it's interesting looking at Gary Bettman. So I've broken this down into sections. So we're going to look at expansion, relocation, the labour unrest, the salary cap, and the NHL players going to the Olympics. These are the sections I'm going to look at because this is key with Gary Bettman as commissioner and why fans have a mixed view of him. So before working at the NHL, as I said, he worked for the NBA when David Stern was commissioner. He became senior vice president at the NBA in the end. He first joined in 1981. He was key in developing the NBA salary cap in 1983, which is going to be important because we're going to come back to the NHL salary cap in due course. Now, the NBA salary cap has basically worked as a soft cap system since 1983 with a few tweaks. Hasn't really changed that much. The NHL salary cap is more of a hard cap system and is significantly different. So, but I think that experience where he was heavily involved in bringing in a league salary cap, I think did impact him and his decision making and the league's decision making in the 2000s. About 20 years after the NBA salary cap's brought in, it does impact his thinking and his decision making in the mid 2000s, and we'll get to that later on. He is elected NHL Commissioner on December 12, 1992. He's the first and only NHL Commissioner we've had, and he took office on February the 1st, 1993, a little over 32 years ago. Now, the first section I want to look at is the expansion under Gary Bettman, because this is key, and this is where a lot of fans feel that he's neglecting the more traditional markets and the Sunbelt relocations and expansions, because there's a lot of them. He's targeting new markets in non-traditional locations, and that's divided the fan base. And we've discussed that to death on this channel before, on live streams and in other videos on the NHL. But under Gary Bettman, there's been a fair bit of expansion. Now, the Panthers and Ducks, who joined in 1993, were announced prior to Gary Bettman being appointed commissioner, but they joined under his watch for the 93-94 season. And then there's a couple of seasons of no expansion until the Predators in Nashville come along in 1998. They are very quickly followed in 1999 by the Atlanta Thrashers. The Minnesota Wild and the Columbus Blue Jackets join in 2000. So there's a splurge with 4 teams in 2 years joining the league. A very rapid expansion in the late 90s to early 2000s. We then had no expansion until 2017. So the infancy of this channel, the Vegas Golden Knights, were the 31st franchise joining the league in 2017. In 2018, I did a video on Gary Bettman as NHL Commissioner, I think with a similar title. A lot's happened since 2018. We've obviously had the COVID shutdown, the bubble playoffs, the bubble divisions as well in 2021. And so there was a bit of disruption in 2020 and 2021 to the season, and we've covered that in other videos anyway. We don't need to cover it in this one, but I think the NHL dealt with the COVID pandemic and getting games played really effectively, getting playoffs played, and getting divisions sorted out for the disrupted 2021 season. I think they were very effective in that. They were one of the more effective leagues in doing so. But in 2021... the Seattle Kraken join as the 32nd franchise. And so we now have 32 teams. Beginning of the 90s, in 1990, we had 21 teams. So the league has expanded massively, and a lot of those expansion teams have come under Gary Bettman's stewardship. Now, relocations, and this is a bugbear for a lot of fans. This is where fans really have a negative perception of Gary Bettman, but you've got to understand economics. So the year he comes in, the Minnesota North Stars relocate to Dallas to become the Dallas Stars. That happens in 1993. Minnesota were just struggling financially. They were in a bad place. They get relocated. This is why the Minnesota Wild become an expansion team 7 years later in 2000. As a little bit, we're sorry we moved your team. Now, the Quebec Nordiques and the Winnipeg Jets relocate a year apart. The Quebec Nordiques and Winnipeg Jets, this is where Canadian fans north of the border have a very negative perception of Gary Bettman. They do not like him. And this caused a lot of reputational damage north of the border with Canadian hockey fans in regards to the NHL. So the Nordiques moved to Colorado to become the Avalanche in 95. And the Winnipeg Jets follow a year later in 96 to go to Phoenix to become the Coyotes. Now the Coyotes will be forced to move again, and we've covered that to death, but I'll discuss that again in this video. And this is where the Canadian fans feel like the NHL was neglecting teams north of the border, and other Canadian teams, the Oilers were one, were also at risk of being relocated. The Senators were sort of settling in as a recent expansion team prior to Gary Bettman coming into the league, but they had some terrible seasons as well, and there were concerns that the Oilers, potentially the Flames, even the Canucks could also be relocated from Canada to the US at various points in the 90s into the 2000s, because there was an economic downturn and the Canadian dollar was very, very weak, sort of similar to how it is today, but for different reasons. And so their relocations left a very bitter taste in the mouths of many fans. But if you look, it's all the WHA teams getting relocated. Nordiques, Jets, and then the Whalers from Hartford in 1997. Arena issues did for them. So 3 out of the 4 WHA teams that had joined the league in 1979 are relocated in the space of 2 years. And there was also seen this deliberate policy of really trashing the WHA legacy by the NHL, which is factually true. The Oilers nearly get relocated. The Oilers were in deep, deep trouble at this time financially as well, and hadn't been successful since 1990. They were struggling. And so there was also this perceived notion with hockey fans that Gary Bettman and the league doesn't like the former WHA sides because they challenged the NHL's dominance as the dominant professional ice hockey league in North America back in the 70s. And there's still that perception that the league, deliberately went out to destroy these franchises. Now, this is all in the 90s. Now, the Thrashers joined as an expansion team in 1999. They are relocated back to Winnipeg, so Winnipeg gets its team back, much like Minnesota gets its team back with expansion in 2011 because they didn't have an arena to play in. And then most recently, the Coyotes, the former Jets, have been relocated to Utah to Salt Lake City. We don't know what name Utah are going to take. Most likely Yeti is going to be, or Mammoth is going to be the team name that Utah settles on for next season with their rebranding. But the Coyotes, also arena issues did for the Coyotes and bad ownership. And the league had pumped money in to the Coyotes franchise, even running it at one point when it declared bankruptcy. So some of these relocations, there's again, fans are left frustrated, even in newer locations like Atlanta, where the league had been before, prior in the 70s, and in Arizona. It's not because fans didn't care about the teams. In fact, grassroots level hockey is still growing in these markets. There's still a legacy where arenas and rinks are being built, young kids and beer leagues are playing, and Phoenix is going to get a team again because they've been earmarked for future expansion. But should the league expand past 32 teams, is there enough talent depth, not only in North America, but Europe, to sustain a bigger 34, 36, 40 team league and to keep the quality levels at a good high level? That is something else that is worth discussing, because the NHL has come out and said we're not expanding anymore at the moment, but we're thinking about it, but not right now, even though there's been a lot of meetings publicly held with ownership groups in places like New Orleans and Houston and Atlanta. Omaha, Nebraska has declared interest. And so there is this perception that we are going to expand again soon. Is that a good thing? Because we had rapid expansion in the 90s, which leads to labour unrest. Yes, this is something that has really pissed off NHL fans over the years, is the amount of lockouts we've had. Now, the 1992 player strike occurs a year before Gary Bettman becomes commissioner, but I do think it's important because it does actually lead into the 94-95 lockout. The player strike over, player likenesses and trading cards, especially, and posters and merchandise, they weren't getting what they felt was fair revenue sharing. Now, we can cover the 92 NHL player strike and all 3 lockouts. I've covered the 2004-2005 lockout before, but we can cover them again in separate videos. This also annoys a lot of NHL fans, and at this time we are having this rapid expansion in the 90s, early 2000s, and there are teams financially struggling, and there is a correlation here. So we have a 92 player strike. This is in the expansion era, as we know. 94-95, the lockout happens and it reduces the season from an 84-game season at the time, because they did used to play 84 games, to a 48-game season. So half the season's pretty much gone, just under half the season's wiped out, and fans are left frustrated. And this leads to further problems down the line with the 2004-2005 lockout, where a whole season is lost and no Stanley Cup is awarded, and a lot of fans were left frustrated with the league, and a lot of fans basically turned their backs on the league. Now, attendance numbers would rebound and fans would return, but there was a perception that the team owners and the league and the players, there was too much greed. But it does lead to a salary cap being brought in for the 05-06 season. Now, I honestly believe Gary Bettman's involvement with the NBA in the 80s and bringing in a salary cap for that league leads to his decision, alongside the team owners, to structure a salary cap going forward. We've had the salary cap since 2005-2006, and we can discuss how it's brought in league parity or not to death. But they bring in the salary cap. The players actually get paid more now in real terms than they were prior to the salary cap. That's interesting. And also league revenue sharing is also tweaked as well in this period. So teams that are losing money get supported by the teams that are making money. And you can debate the pros and cons of that. And again, some of the Canadian teams at times have dipped into this league revenue sharing when they have been struggling. However, this season, most of the Canadian teams have done rather well. And as a Winnipeg Jets fan, we're doing rather well. So it varies from season to season. But some teams regularly struggle financially. Coyotes were an example where they were dipping in more regularly than not into this league fund. And there's a lot of issues here. And again, the 2004-2005 lockout slows expansion down. It stops because then we get the 2012-2013 lockout, which again reduces it to a 48-game season. And again, fans are left frustrated that basically half the season's wiped out. And, they're not got any hockey to watch. Now, during these three lockouts, a lot of players go over to Europe to play, and I was very fortunate as a teenager, and especially in the 04-05 lockout, that I got to see some NHL talent play not only for my local team, the Bracknell Bees, which are now the Berkshire Bees here in the UK, but also some of the rival teams as well in the British League system at the time. And I was very, very fortunate that I got to see NHL level players, even if they were like fourth liners or third pair defensemen or even just general enforcer types who would get a call. They were playing on British ice surfaces, and a lot of them did. I've done videos on looking at where players played during the 2004-2005 lockout, and it's very interesting where they ended up. A lot of players went over to Europe. So as European fans, we got lucky there, but North American fans, they were left wondering what's going on. Now, since 2013, there has been no further labour unrest. The relations between the NHLPA and the NHL are a lot better than what they were. There are still areas where there could be further improvement, and we'll get to that, which is basically the NHL players going to the Olympics. And this becomes a sticking point when it comes to CBA negotiations. But as things stand, we managed to get through the COVID period. They renegotiated a new CBA. Escrow was a big issue, and that did get resolved. And NHL participation at the Olympics has been a big issue surrounding various things. Now, we've discussed the salary cap, we've discussed labour unrest, and we can look and do individual videos on the 94-95 lockout. We can revisit the 2004-2005 lockout, and of course we can look at the 2012-2013 lockout. Now, NHL participation at the Olympics has been a hot topic while Gary Bettman has been commissioner, and Gary Bettman has basically hinted that outside of North America and potentially Europe, participation at the Olympics is a bit of a hot topic. But the first Olympics they go to is actually in Japan in 1998 at Nagano. The players went, and it was well received. Fans were really happy. It's the biggest event at the Winter Olympics is the ice hockey final, because you're seeing the best of the best play each other in an international competition. They returned to Salt Lake City in 2002, Italy in 2006, 2010 they obviously Vancouver, possibly the greatest Olympic ice hockey final of all time. 2014 they go to Sochi, debatable, but again there's a lot of Russian players in the NHL, and this is at a time when Vladimir Putin's sucking up to everyone to sports wash his regime. But they didn't go in 2018 to South Korea, and they didn't go in 2022 to China, even though they were meant to because of COVID restrictions in Beijing, but they are due to attend in 2026. Now, this is where the Four Nations that we've recently had is being used as a test bed for shutting down the league. Gary Bettman's come out and said that it's a mixed bag when it comes to NHL participation at the Olympics, but the TV ratings are higher when NHL players are at the Olympics, so the IOC does want the NHL registered players to go because it improves their ratings, and of course you've got the corporate and the sponsorship. But there's a lot of debates around NHL participation at the Olympics. But then you look at FIFA allowing football players, soccer players to play at the Summer Olympics, for example, rugby union and World Rugby allowing the Sevens programs. So other team sports where there is a club country debate, which ice hockey has, much like association football, rugby union, rugby league and other sports, which are brutal contact sports, other governing bodies and leagues have figured out a way to get their players at the Olympics and representing at the Olympics. The NHL has, as I say, had a mixed bag relationship, and it all depends on player payments, player insurance, sponsorships, the corporate, and that has become a bit of a sticking point. But the players want to go, and that is key to any CBA negotiations. They were meant to go in 2022. The COVID restrictions curtailed that in China at the time, which hurt the Winter Olympics in 2020. They are meant to go again in 2026. So next year we shall see if they actually do attend or not, or whether the NHL pulls the plug, because we've got upcoming CBA negotiations and TV deals. I could have discussed all the TV deals. There are some big TV deals that have been made. Expansion fees. The league is now making more money than it ever has, and it is catching up the three major leagues above it in regards to revenue earned. Of course, then you can discuss the league deciding to get all the gambling sponsors sponsoring the league as well, and the pros and cons of that, with Shane Pinto getting his suspension for betting breaches, which was the first real test of the league since gambling sponsorship's been a thing. And so there's other issues at play here. Now, the final thing I'm going to say is Gary Bettman is regularly booed when he hands out the Stanley Cup, and when he gives press conferences and when he appears at games, he takes a lot of heat from fans. But you've got to remember, it's the owners that employ him, so basically it's the owners saying, this is what we want you to say. You are our commissioner. He does have some freedom to make decisions, but the team owners, all 32 of them, they've hired him to represent them and the league. But he says this: if I'm not getting booed at games, I'm not doing my job properly. So he knows that he's a figure of dislike, derision and hate from fans, and we've discussed why. Now, in regards to the NHL's Sunbelt policy, it does appear that they are going to continue with the Sunbelt policy, and they may return to locations they've been to before, like Phoenix, like Atlanta. They may look at Houston, where the WHA was before, but they also may look at slightly more traditional markets. So we may see the Nordiques return, potentially, if the economic conditions are right. And this is where a lot of NHL fans think more too passionately rather than logically. The reason why the Jets and the Nordiques in the 90s were relocated were for economic reasons, not because fans weren't attending games. It was becoming ruinously expensive to run Canadian teams with US dollars because of the exchange rate and the economic situation at the time, which is becoming quite similar now. And this is why when Vegas joined the league in 2017 and Seattle in 2021, while Quebec was a potential location, economics did work against them in that regard. They have the arena, they have the fan base, it will cost them more to run the team in real terms because the league pays salaries in US dollars, not Canadian dollars. And so running costs do become, and economics do become, quite prohibitive. But there we go. There is a quick look at NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. It's the second video I have done on Gary Bettman when I do a look at his time as Commissioner. But a lot more has happened since the last time I did a video on Gary Bettman as Commissioner. And we've still got the MLS to do yet. So we shall get there in due course. But thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comments section below. I really appreciate all the support we have had over the last 8 years, because yesterday was the channel's 8th birthday. Memberships are available, so look at that little tab in the section below. Hit like and subscribe if you like what you see, and I will have some more content for you all very, very soon.